And we did that. And it was an amazing 2-year experience for me. It was because the first time you ask it, what do you want? David, what do you want? Well, I need it. They start, it's like, well, they started with more of a need response. Is that really what you want? Well, no, what I want? And so they sort of sit there for, no one's really asked me what I want. I really asked, what do you want to see in your community? They started to share this, and it was amazing. We did a lot. But and when you started to add it up, and we did this, we recorded all of these. We like that, and we transcribed all of this stuff, and then I hired an Indian team, and I hired a non-Indian team to what they call theme it out. Read everyone and tell me what you're hearing. We did young people, we did elders, we did, and we wanted to make sure the methodology, so we did, women with children, women without children. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't all just here in South Minneapolis, so demographically we wanted to make sure it mirrored. So we were very careful about that. But it was amazing what started to come out. And that's what became the foundation of the blueprint, the American Indian Community Blueprint. And what you heard from Indian people when asked the question what they want, it's visionary. Indian people know what they want. But if you put that up against the type of infrastructure that we currently have, there's a disconnect. Because again, folks are ready to drive the electric automobile on the freeway, and we're still driving this Ford Pinto. So there's a disconnect between the organizations that we currently have and the type of vision and desire that Indian people want. And we've got to connect that. And I think a critical piece of that, in addition to our own people being forthright with their vision, is that we've got to change the dynamic of the funder organization dynamic. We've got to put community back in the center. And part of it, so this goes back to this treaty idea. By and large, organizations, nonprofit Indian organizations, are what? They're corporations. Our corporations. I have one, I respond to a board. What we've forgotten, by and large, is that all this property, when I talk about collective resources, when I say, Indians collectively own, but we don't really work as strongly as we could. Laura Waterman Woodstock and I did some work some years ago around looking at asset and equity versus debt. Now this is probably 7-8 years old data, but at that time Laura did some interesting work around looking at property equity. And what we basically calculated was that the Indian community, again, being these owners of property and land and assets, was sitting on over $60 million in equity to less than $20 million in debt. Or in assets, $60 million in assets, $20 million in debt. In other words, we're sitting on over $40 million in essence in equity. So this idea of if we only had more money didn't hold water in many ways, because we're sitting on $40 million worth of equity. But the issue is we don't know how to leverage it. And the Indian organization sees the debt word, the D word, as a bad word. But you can't do elements of development and move without understanding that. And so we have a number of organizations right now that own their building debt-free. They own it. The Indian Center, debt-free. A year ago, I spent over 1.5 years in the courts with American Indian OIC. We cleared title. They own that. They have maybe about $100,000 of debt on that whole property. It's over 2 acres. So we had to go to title court and all that. It's a long story. But they've got 2.2 acres on the light rail station. It's worth millions. And yet we see ourselves as poor. And so how do you move to a prosperity campaign if in fact we don't see the fact that right in our backyard we hold a lot of potential, not only human capital, which is the key, but also these other things. And how do we build the type of human capital that understands these things and can really do something for and with the Indian community? I'll close with this because I didn't finish my corporate. So part of the challenge is because we're corporate, we've taken on a corporate model, nonprofit organizations. Boards see their primary role as fiduciary holders, fiduciary representative. They have to make the fiduciary responsibility to what? To the corporation. So we hold tight to the resources. This is our building. This is ours. We've got it. But we've forgotten the fundamental that we're trust holders for the community. I don't own this. I bought this building. I don't own it. This is the community's. And so I think that is going back to a value system. Organizations, particularly Indian organizations, need to move away from a corporate sort of model structure, and I understand why it's set, to really understand how can we work together, collaborative partnership, and move to really understanding we're simply trust holders for the community who have a particular vision, and now we also have assets that we can leverage, and let's really be the architects of our own destiny. And let's go to funders and say, you don't like it? Well, just kidding, funders. But, I think that's going to be the challenge, is how do funders get on board with us, with our vision, as opposed to, the other way around, so.
Well, I want to do a time check because I'm notorious for not having any sense of time and what time. 15 minutes, okay. Well, it's interesting, Justin, on a couple of levels. What you were saying, and one of the things that I think, and one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation was, this is kind of heresy in the nonprofit world, but again, to start thinking about this like that way. But I think one of the things it really does, at least for me, what it did, was made me think again. We've had since then too a larger indictment. This isn't about the American Indian Committee. The American Indian Committee was quite successful at ensuring that their needs and their community's needs would be taken care of from that first example of the blankets up until now. But as you outline this kind of process, what we're really talking about is kind of the nonprofit industrial complex, which is a little different, which is this society that we've created where nonprofits then kind of meet the needs that community once did, and how we've kind of lost a piece of our sense of agency over our lives, or sovereignty over kind of how we build community. And I think one of the things that when I read your piece, and I've been seeing this over time, it's made me think more and more that this is what your example was within the American Indian Community, but this is a larger piece that society needs to grip and grapple with as we look forward to some of the huge challenges that our society is going to be faced with. We have demographic shifts, both in age and with young versus old, and how do we make sure that isn't averse, because these are our two most important populations. Mm-hmm. We have demographic changes where we have a date 2042 when the United States is going to be changing from a country that was majority people who are from European descent and look white to people of color. These are important challenges in our society, which a nonprofit world, a civic society, is going to help mitigate if we get that right. So I just wanted to just say, again, there's no question in this, but just a little thought about how important this learning laboratory is right here, where you're bringing up some of the hard questions and bringing together community to wrestle with what is it that we want and what is it that we need from each other to move forward.
I've said a lot, and one of the things I want to make sure that is understood here is that I understand why this notion of an industrial, what did you call it? Social nonprofit. It was needed at that time. I mean, this is not a denigration of the folks who worked their butt off to create all of this. As a matter of fact, I hold them in high honor in the sense that they did again, you put it up against that sort of 1950 examples that I gave, you can see why all those things were created and the fact that they were able to do that. But I think at the same time, the danger of complacency is before us. Little Earth, which has 212 units, Little Earth, the United Tribes, over here has 212 units. On any given day can have 1,000 people living there. And over 50, I think at one point, Bill Ziegler mentioned 60-some% of the people living there are 21 and under. And the average median age of the entire Indian U.S. population is 29. It's a very young population. that continues to make babies and grow. And so what was interesting, I remember this planner developer asked me about the corridor, and he said, "Who's your target audience?" You know, and people, that's always like, well, who's your target audience? You know, and it was sort of like, well, everyone, Indian people. I was like, well, no, who's your target? Who are you developing this corridor for? What's your goal in it? And I remember, and I was just wrestling with that. I said, well, it's for visitors because it's for the Indian community. He's like, who? I mean, it's just sort of this very broad. And he said, because in reality, the type of development that you're sort of envisioning of a destination with storefronts and sort of urban density and all of these, all of these things, that's going to take 10, 20 years. So the people that in essence you really should be involving and targeting are those 17, 18-year-olds that are going to probably be purchasing homes or job in 10, 15 years. I mean, so we're really, this whole generation that are a little older, we're the wrong target in essence, is what it was really interesting because I never thought about it like that. That often when we're engaging community members, the ones that are often absent are the teenagers. And yet, that's who's going to, this is going to be their backyard very soon. And they're the ones who, when we talk about job creation, when we talk about, and so it's, and even NACDI, we've been challenged. We've had some youth involvement on some, but by and large, very little. We tend to, adults and those who, so it's an interesting one, I think, again, this idea of, who are we involving? What's the, who's the target audience for all of this work? And are they in here? It's been really great to see how many young people have been coming through this exhibit and asking great questions and things. But it's going to, again, part of perhaps my role in this is simply to be posing questions. Today, a friend of mine on my Facebook wrote, she just kind of put it out there, and you see this from this generation. She's in her 20s, mid-20s, and she just wrote, are you, meaning you, General, are you a entitlement Indian or are you a self-determination Indian? Just kind of, and you're starting to see this generation of the early 20s, 20-somethings, starting to further and forward wrestle with this issue of entitlement, of dependency versus self-determination, and self-sufficiency, and wrestling with what do those terms mean. Because in some ways, young people see entrepreneurship as exciting and leading to this notion of self-sufficiency, but are also picking up very quickly sort of Western models of capitalism that they're not thinking totally through. So we're adopting a lot of things in many ways, incorporating. There are many positives, but there are also some really fundamental negatives, and so we've got to really provide platforms for our young people to wrestle with these things. And I don't think we do a really great job of that. Well, here, we, meaning this particular community, at really engaging our young people in some of these complex questions and letting them wrestle with it. But anyway.
I think it's a challenge for all of us.
Well, there are a number of Indians here, and I'll never speak for them on this issue because it's one. Tribes determine enrollment. A lot of folks, Indians, think, oh, the federal government determines enrollment, but tribes do. So you have some tribes that are descendancy rolls. They go back to a particular census roll, and if you can prove your lineage to it, you can be enrolled. Some have, like I said, mine is 1/4. Some are less. Right now, some tribes are exploring cross-enrollment or recognizing, like I said, you could have a young or an Indian person that's 4 different tribes. They're 100% American Indian, but 4 different tribes, and not enough of any of them to be enrolled. So that's the enrollment side. So tribes determine that, and I think that's a very real and ongoing debate among tribes to figure out how do we start wrestling with that. The other is just simply the issue of identity. Some would say if you practice the values and you see yourself as an Indian, a tribal person, and you live that way, you're Native. It's a belief system, it's a value system, it's that identity that you see yourself as you are. And so there are many who are not enrolled that identify and are involved in the Indian community and are native and are welcomed and seen as that. Which then leaves the openness for others to take advantage of that. And I remember when I was at the University of Minnesota, I worked there, and every year we'd get a lot of non-Indians who'd claim to be Indian because they thought it was free tuition, or or you see that a lot. My mom's a nurse in an Indian health service, and so people will come in. So people try to take advantage, but by and large, I think Indian people are very respectful of those who identify as Indian people and live as that's probably the beauty of Indian folks is we're a very welcoming, familial people, relational people. And so we let everyone in this country. And relying on, at least for me, my teachings, my mother, father, my grandparents, and as I greeted you as Kwasina, relatives. And that title of All My Relations Gallery, that philosophy, that we're all related. We're all in this world together, that we've all been endowed with gifts from the Creator, languages, customs, life ways that are beautiful. And we're fortunate to live in a neighborhood that's ethnically, racially, I don't really like that term, but ethnically, culturally, economically diverse. And I think part of it is Indian folks, like I said, are relational people. And can get along with anyone as long as they can understand our context, understand this history, appreciate some of these complexities. Because I think Indian folks, by and large, again, while place-based people, recognize we don't own that idea of ownership. Like I said, we own it, but it's like we're stewards, we're caretakers, we're all in this together. And so I think we've been by and large inviting new folks for centuries and helping out. And so I just look at it as really an opportunity to really live out a principle of a belief of we're all related. And we've got to do this, and so it's living out that value system of relationship, of relative, wherever you come from. And if you think of the first ones here, whether you want to talk to the Pilgrims, and they were hurt, these folks were hurting, they were starving. Indians could have said, "Too bad." No, they said, "We'll share. You're welcome." And so I think we've been living that. I was looking, at those photos back there with the timber. I mean, it's really interesting to hear the stories of some of these large timber companies. Indians, again, they were like, well, yeah, I mean, you can have some of these. I mean, they didn't think they were going to be taken advantage of at every turn. And so I think, again, that's the challenge we have today is we've been so knocked around that it's almost like, do we trust again? Should we take? But I think Indian people have first allowed that value of we are all related to be in the forefront, and at least I hope that's how we continue. Is that kind of what? One, I think I think about a number of tribes have a very similar prophecy teaching about this idea of they knew that some would say for 7 generations Indian people would suffer. That there was this recognition and understanding that severe, whether it's death, loss of language, some really terrible things were going to happen to Indian people. And it was going to happen for some time. And I think we went through much of that. And some speak of it as there was going to be the 7 generations of this, that it wasn't going to be 7 years or 70 years, but a period of significant time of great hardship and hurtfulness. But the prophecy goes on to say, and then there would begin this return. And it wasn't going to be, again, an immediate turnaround or a 7-year turnaround, but again, this idea of the 7-generation return, this healing, this mending, some would say, of that hoop. What I see right now, I remember at the turn of the century, the president of the World Bank made this speech about basically how the 20th century was all about how big things could get, how big we could get. But the 21st century was really going to be about how do we fit back in? And this is the president of the world, man. And so to me, this reclamation process that we're on, while not going to happen right away, this world needs its indigenous wisdom. This world is trying to figure out how to fit back into it, to live in harmony. And so in some ways, I think this idea of how we're going, yes, we have all these challenges and things around us, but the reality is I believe this mending, this return is happening right now. I see young people learning their languages at a rate that's unbelievable. I see things not just in terms of land-based, but in terms of people returning back to their ceremonies. So if those things are at front, my belief is that return is going to happen. And so it may not happen in my lifetime, but I'm just a part of a little bit of that journey. And all of our, not just Indian people, indigenous peoples throughout the world. And in many ways, we're all indigenous, right? Somewhere, somehow, we have roots. And you're seeing it more and more in society. People are going back to find out who they are, where they come from, those meanings. And once we get back, I was just sharing with a sister earlier, she said, we're all tribal? And she just went back. She was studying her Puerto Rican roots and things like. She said, it was so cool because we all started with the drum too. It's that return that's happening, and people are starting to recognize it. So it maybe not the answer we're looking for, but that's kind of how I kind of view that.